What's up, guys? Jason Raleigh here of Raleigh Performance, and we're back with our third video of the programming series. If you didn't check out the second one, it was about auto-regulation. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, so make sure that you go back and watch that video so if I make any reference points, you know what I'm talking about. Today is probably going to be a little bit of a longer video, but it's one of the most important videos that I'm going to make of this whole series, and it's talking about the training variables that you're going to manipulate in any program or program you design in order to get to the desired effects that you want. So our three variables that we're going to talk about is frequency, which can be thought of as muscle groups a week or lift a week if you're in sports specific development and you're looking at powerlifting. Then you're going to talk about how many times you bench a week, or if you're in Olympic weightlifting, how many times you snatch a week, things like that. And we have volume, which is S times R is sets times reps, gives us NL, which equals number of lifts, okay? And then we have sets times reps times load is L, and equals tonnage. So think about how many pounds you're moving in a day, week, or month, okay? These are two different ways that you can track your volume. I tend to go against the bottom one, but I'm gonna use NL for today because it's a little bit easier. And then we have intensity, which is our last variable we manipulate, and that's percentage of 1RM or RPE, rating and perceived exertion, which we talked about in our last video on training auto-regulation. So to start off, we're gonna look at what are the differences in frequency and how does it affect volume and intensity in their relationship and how we can manipulate these. So to start off on a basic level, let's look at a lifter that only lifts one time a week. Or for this video, I'm specifically going to be talking more about strength training and lifts. I'm going to make some reference about muscle groups. That way if you're watching and you're trying to get more hypertrophy out of this, you'll understand a little bit on that too. So let's say that we are only squatting one time a week. Both of these individuals here, okay? We have one time a week. And then this individual here, individual A, we'll say, is squatting 3x10, and then individual B is squatting 6x5. Both of them have 30 number of lifts per week, okay? And individual A squats at 70% or 7.5 RPE, and then individual B squats at 75% or 7.5 RPE, okay? So typically, we're thought of that we have hypertrophy rep ranges. And then we have strength rep ranges, which is sort of true, but not so much true as we thought. And the current literature took a look at a study just like this. Maybe not the exact same sets and reps that I set up, but they were volume equated. So volume, total number of lifts were equated. So when they took a look at this, the 3x10 with a 30 number of lifts and 6x5 with a 30 number of lifts, okay? The group that had the higher percentage, so 6x5 here, actually had the same muscle growth as the 3x10 group, or the hypertrophy group is what they called it. But the group that lifted at the higher intensity here actually had greater strength gains, which just kind of makes sense here. So these implications, what do we want to take away from this? If your goal is straight hypertrophy, okay, there's some pitfalls of using higher sets. And the pitfall of using higher sets is the group inside that study complained about being in the gym longer, fatigue, not wanting to train as much. So if your goal is strictly hypertrophy and you want to get in and get out of the gym, go with more reps, okay? And the reason I say that is, yeah, the strength gains won't be as good, but that's okay. That's not your goal, right? Your goal was hypertrophy, and you're just a hypertrophy athlete, or a bodybuilder, or looking for hypertrophy. Maybe that's your goal in general. I would go with the 3x10. You're going to get in and get out quicker, okay? Now, if you're a strength athlete and you need to get more muscle growth and you don't have you have a limited amount of time, then I would generally recommend you go for the 6x5 for multiple reasons. Depending on where you're at in athlete development, I'll talk about that in a minute. The 6x5 provides a little bit of advantage, and the advantage is you have less technical breakdown in sets of 5s than you do in 10. That's generally going to be true, okay? Secondly, we know that I told you muscle growth was matched. So if you did 3x10 or 6x5, doesn't matter. The muscle growth was matched in that study. So if your goal and you need some more muscular strength, we're going to be talking about accumulation phases in our next video, which is a volume phase. You might want to go with a 6x5, and you'll see that you can work at a higher intensity, and it's the same RPE, okay? So the sets and reps you choose dictates the load as well. If you're going to use higher reps, then you have to drop the load. Well, when you use higher reps and you drop the load, then obviously you have less muscle strength gain. Okay, so if you're a strength athlete, because of this new literature, it might be better just to do more sets and reps. Now, in a case of you being a beginning athlete and you're just new to a strength sport, and you're in a hypertrophy stage, or you need more muscle mass, which most beginners do, or just need more time on the bar, I'm going to program for my athlete to go with the 3x10. And the reason is again, I said that the 6x5 complained about more fatigue. They didn't want to be in the gym as much. If you're a new athlete, I just want you to enjoy the sport. So program the 3x10 for yourself. Utilize that. Get in and get out. Okay, that's going to make enough strength gains for you. This 6x5, I tend to go with the higher intermediates and advanced. So if you're trying to progress and you're in the upper thresholds of your athlete development, then you might want to go with the 6x5. It's a better choice. All right, so taking a look at increasing frequency. So what happens when we increase frequency? This is probably going to be pretty common sense here, okay? When you squat 2 times a week, you got 3x10 and 3x8. You got 54 number of lifts, working at 70%, 73%. Okay, fine. And then let's say we go to 3 times a week, right? So you're squatting 3 times a week, you got 3x10, a 3x3, and a 3x8 equals 63 number of lifts, okay? So I don't think I mentioned up here, or I might have, volume is pretty much going to be the driver of most things. If a lift is stalling, then increasing volume is a good start, not always the best start. In hypertrophy, there's a pretty dose relationship response. The more volume, and considering you recover from it, the more strength or muscle gain you're going to have out of it. So in this group, since I increased the volume, we went 54 to 63 number of lifts by just adding one more squat session, we'll probably get better results. Now, you'll see that I added a 3x3 day in the middle. Okay, so why did I do that? Rather than jumping up to 3x6 or another like 3x8, which just gives us a lot more volume, and we only went from 2 times a week, that's more than we probably need to progress. So instead, you can add a 75% day. So we're both still working at 70% and 73%, and then the middle day is 75%. It's just a little bit of heavy day. Since we know up here that if we work heavier and at the same tonnage, we're going to get stronger too and have the same muscle growth. So if we were to average out this percentage here on these days, it's going to be an average higher percentage than on the guy squatting 2 times a week. So you just add one little small day in there, and that can be served as an active recovery. It's going to facilitate some more recovery. Also, I want to point out, even if I were to take the 2 times a week and I were to make them squat 63 number of lifts, and then 3 times a week squat 63 number of lifts, the average intensity stayed the same. Everything was the same there. The 3 times a week group might still have better results. And there's one reason for that. Neuromuscular system has greater adaptations with higher frequency. So the nervous system plus the muscle connection there together, think of that for the neuromuscular system. That tends to have a greater adaptation the more frequent it is stimulated. So with that, if you were to go with a higher frequency program, which I generally recommend, even if it's a lower volume, you're going to have a little bit greater adaptations. Also, if you were to look at the 63 number of lifts, well, we had a 3x3 day, okay? If I did it in the 2 times a week, then this number of reps or sets are going to have to go up for 2 days. So in those 2 days, you have to get more number of lifts than you do in 3 days, so you're likely to be more exhausted. Where if you do it, you spread out those number of lifts throughout the week, you can come into each session and be a little bit more recovered and have a greater performance, or even work at a higher RPE or intensity, if you will. So now we talked about that little bit of frequency here. There's one way I want to approach this as well, and this is if you're moving up from 2 times a week to 3 times a week, don't just go to the comp lift itself. Okay, so you can have 2 times a week plus a variation. So if we're talking about the squat here, if your comp squat is a low bar, so you use low bar 2 times a week, and then maybe you use a high bar 1 time a week, or a front squat, assuming that maybe the quads are your weak point. There's some advantages to this, okay? The first advantage I see at jumping to the 2 times a week plus a variation day is if you're an individual that squats and then when they get down here and they push back like this, that generally is saying that your quads are weak, okay? So the advantage of adding a high bar or a front squat day is that it's going to fix your technique. You're going to be more efficient. The more efficient you are at activating muscle groups, the more power or force you're going to be able to put out later on. So we're wasting less energy. So you're going to be more efficient at that. And it's less cost effective because you'll see here that we programmed 3x10, 3x8, 3x3 with a variation, okay? So this 3x3 variation, and then there's a 3x3 in here. The number of lifts is 63 and 63. However, the 3x3 at a front squat is going to be a lower intensity relative to your low bar or competition squat 1RM. So the fatigue it accumulates is going to be a little bit less, but we're still getting the best bang for our buck for it in some sense because we're getting stronger quads. Or if you look at it in the way we talked about neuromuscular adaptations, we're going to get better at activating our quads, which later is going to carry over to that lift. So we're not having to work at a higher intensity. So it's going to be less cost effective, if you will, as far as causing fatigue. So there's some advantage in that. And if you're making gains there, don't change it. You don't need to jump straight up to 3 times a week. Think of a squat as a squat, and that's why I said we have 63 number of lifts. The way you advance of these number of lifts is where the advantage comes. So I'm saying on that, if we went from 54 number of lifts to 63 number of lifts, we already know, I said the more volume generally equates into more results, especially for hypertrophy. And I also said, because of this first study we looked at, that if you work at a higher percentage overall, then you're going to have greater strength gains. Okay? And that's what's going to happen if you go from a 2 times a week plus a variation to 3 times a week squat. Okay? Even if we were to use the same protocol, 63 number of lifts for both of these, because the 75% is going to be higher intensity of 1RM than my variation lift is to my actual 1RM, then the average intensity, so the average intensity of this and this average intensity went up, okay? Even though the number of lifts is the same, my average intensity went up, so my strength gains are going to be better. So that is a way to progress as an athlete long term. And when I say long term, I'm not saying that each training block you need to increase your volume, because you definitely don't. If you're familiar with linear periodization, which we will talk about in our next one, if we look at the model, volume goes down and then intensity goes up. Even if we look at block periodization, which is just a different way of organizing from like high volume to strength emphasis, overall, the volume's still going to go down. It may just undulate a little bit like this, okay? I'm talking about when you start meet prep to meet prep, then you might want to go from, 2 times a week variation to the next meet prep, then you go 3 times a week if you didn't see the results you're looking for. And when I say that, I'm not meaning you to make 100-pound gains, because that's just not going to happen. I'm saying if you didn't budge at all, then maybe it might be time to go up to higher specificity. Most likely, you're going to be able to sit on this 2 times a week plus a variation for a very long time, just like you did for this 2 times a week. So don't rush the process. Now, there is some times where you might want to just jump to a higher frequency, low volume right away if you're having a hard time learning the skill. But that's a whole nother thing itself, okay? So some take-home points. All right, increase your frequency to increase your volume. I recommend that generally if you're starting to get really fatigued inside your sessions and you've already added, like, if you're already doing like 5x10 on one day and then 4x8 on the next day, just separate that out into 3 sessions for squats rather than 2, so you'll get better lifts per session. Excuse me. Okay, to recap, higher frequency generally has greater neuromuscular adaptations. So even if we match the number of lifts, 63 with 63 on 2 times a week and 3 times a week, the 3 times a week might have a higher benefit just because their skill efficiency is going to go up because that neuromuscular adaptation is a little bit greater. So when we talk about volume, okay, so this is where I'm going to talk a little bit more about muscle groups as well. Volume drives your results. This is generally true for strength, but even more so true for hypertrophy, okay? If your goal is hypertrophy, 40 to 70 reps a body group per day is efficient to get results you're looking for. That's a good starting point. Always start out on the lower. And the same thing applies here. As I did the 54 number of lifts, think of that as reps. So that's 54 number of lifts right here. This might change to day 1 if I'm focusing on my chest. Day 1, I'm going to do 40, and then day 2, I'm going to do 50, okay? So then we have a total of 90 reps, okay? And the same thing applies if I do this for higher frequency. So if I were to change my frequency here, if I were to move my chest, I train my chest now from 2 times a week, we have 90 reps, then I train my chest 3 times a week. We're gonna look at 40, we'll go 30, and then we'll go 50, okay? So then we have 90, we have 120 reps. Okay, so you'll notice that, again, that middle week was still relatively low. Last time it was 3x3 for strength, and now if we're talking about muscle group training, it was still 30. So I didn't just jump up to that 40, I just didn't make a huge jump. It just needs a small increase, okay? So looking at this, if we increase frequency, it's an easier way to spread out our volume throughout the week. And especially if your goal is muscular hypertrophy, higher volume generally associates with more muscle gain. Okay. Brad Schoenfeld just put out a meta-analysis. It should be out soon. If you're interested in that, you can definitely make a comment below, email me, and I can shoot that over to you if you're not able to find it. So as you increase volume, then intensity generally has to go down, just because it's a little bit easier to get in volume. So like I set up here with a 3x10 and the 6x5, you'll notice that neither of these are really relatively high volume. The RPE, or radial perceived exertion, is exactly the same for each, and that's because we wanted to match that. We're trying to get as much volume as we can. If I put this at 80%, most people aren't going to be able to do that. Higher end athletes, intermediates, maybe, but most people aren't. So in general consensus, if you're trying to get your volume up, you need to work at relatively moderate intensities between 65 to 80, depending on where you're at. That can change very fast. So increase volume and increase intensity. When would you do this? This is what I call the shock method. I shouldn't say I call it, that's what it's been called, is shock method or shock microcycle. So this is one you do if you are making a training program, and let's say that you are struggling with your squat and you've already went through a program and you're going to remake another program for a volume phase, and then you would do, let's say 5x5 week 1 on squat at 75%, then or you can do, let's start at 77, okay? So 77%, and then the next week 2 you do 5x5 at 80%, and then week 3 the shock would come in where you're going to increase both the volume and the intensity. So you'd go 6x5 at 82%. That is what we call a shock, or shock microcycle. There's some different variations on that, so don't take that as an absolute, but that's the way I'm going to refer to it. So when you increase the volume and the intensity on the same lift at the same time, it's a shock. Use it sparingly. What's that going to do? That's generally going to be for more intermediate and advanced. This is a disclaimer, but what it's going to do is it's going to cause a little bit greater adaptation because the stimulus is greater. So you can use that as a tool. You can also use it as a tool to overreach. It doesn't mean you should do it all the time. Most of the time, you're just going to increase intensity, which we'll get to in reason. Volume causes greater fatigue than intensity. Keep that in mind. So fatigue accumulates faster as you get higher in volume. So that's why when you get closer to meet, you need to drop off your volume. If you're going to deload, I would drop off volume, not necessarily intensity. Intensity might drop a little bit or stay the same or increase depending on where you're at. Generally, I'm going to say for most people, just increase your intensity by like 1 to 2.5% and decrease your volume to half of what you were doing, and that'll be a deload. When we look at intensity, the take-home points here, increase your intensity first for progressive overload. So in the first video, we talked about progressive overload. Okay, so in that same demonstration where I said 5x5 at 70%, then week 2 is 5x5 at 80%. That is increasing intensity, and that's applying progressive overload. We made it harder the next step. You can use volume as progressive overload, but I would start with intensity first, okay? And then the last resort would be the shock method. So if you're gonna use progressive overload, increase intensity first. If that doesn't work, then maybe add a set. If that doesn't work, then you would add both together. Most of the times, you're going to be able to make adaptations, but it's increasing intensity, even if your volume as a whole went up, okay? That might have confused someone. So if, let's say, your first volume phase, you were squatting at 10,000 pounds, and then your second volume phase, which comes in later in your next meet prep, you start squatting 12,000 total pounds. You can sit on that and just continuously increase intensity, which will increase your volume a little bit because they are related. When we took it, the sets times reps times load, that equals tonnage. Okay, this part was a little confusing, so if it confused anyone, just shoot me an email and I'll definitely answer that. It'll make more sense in our next video, and we get to take a look at how you build an entire training program. And the last point is what I said. Volume, increase percentage of 1RM and decrease volume the closer you get to meet. And that just goes back to here. Volume causes greater fatigue than intensity, okay? So these are your 3 variables that you will manipulate to get the results you're looking for. Frequency is a tool. Volume is a tool. Intensity is a tool. Use them sparingly and use them correctly as the way we just applied, and you're going to be able to get the results that you want. As a disclaimer, because I said volume is the key to driving results. That doesn't mean you need to drive your volume from 5x5 to 8x5 to get faster results. Do not do that. Again, causes more fatigue. If you're not aware of how to manage that fatigue, you're likely to get injured, you're not going to like the gym as much, and you might have good results at first, but again, later on, you're going to get injured. Use it sparingly. Frequency and intensity are generally good ways to start. Increasing frequency, increasing intensity. These are all good ways to start. So I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, like I said, just shoot me an email, put a message below, and I'll gladly answer it. Thanks for tuning in, guys.